the YSS Fork Upgrade Kit. Hey, how's it going? So as you can see, the plan for today is to upgrade the front fork suspension on the Royal Enfield 650. And in this video, what I want to do is take you through the entire process, including the removal and drilling of the fork damper tubes. Now, that is a step that I think a lot of people that do this YSS upgrade skip. The reason why a lot of people don't remove the fork damper tubes and drill them out is that it does require a special tool in order to remove them. And a lot of people don't have this tool. Well, nobody does, because this is a very specific tool just for that one step. So what we're going to do is we'll talk a little bit about why it's important that you remove and drill the fork damper tubes and what you can do if you don't have this special tool. But for right now, what I want to do in this video is send you forward into the future and talk to future Jerry, where he'll show you all the different parts that we're going to be replacing and all the tools you are going to need to complete this process. So that way, when you come back from the future to present time and we get started on this process, you'll already know more than I do as far as what the process is going to be and all the tools you're going to need to complete the installation.
Are you telling me you built a time machine out of a Royal Enfield?
Future Jerry here. So as you can see, we do have the front forks already taken off the bike. And if we go over here, these are the tools that we need. To take off the front tire, you will need a 24 millimeter spanner. Well, this is a 5/8, but I believe it's about a 16 millimeter wrench. You will need a 5 and a 6 millimeter Allen bolts to take off the speed sensor and to loosen the pinch bolt to take off the front tire axle. Also recommended you have a torque wrench, so that way you can tighten back up the front tire. This 22 millimeter socket is for taking off the top fork cap, and then this 19 millimeter socket is for the new YSS top fork cap. Now this here, this is the special tool you will need for removal of the damper rod. You're not going to have one of these, and so we could talk about at the end of the video and what your options may be to make something. A mallet may not be necessary, but I use it to take off the front axle. The other thing you will need is an 8 millimeter Allen, and that is to take off the bolt on the front fork damper. Highly recommended that you get yourself an impact drill with an 8 millimeter bit to take off that bolt, because it is very, very difficult, pain in the ass to get it out. Something else you may need is something to measure with, or a digital caliper. That way you can take measurements for when you're putting your forks back in for your fork heights, and also for the positioning of your headlight brackets on your forks. Now this here, you don't necessarily need this. The forks do take 430 milliliters of fork oil, but because the parts we're putting in are different, this can be helpful to measure the air gap. And we'll talk more about this when we do go to put the fork oil back into the fork tubes. Also, you may want a flathead screwdriver, and that's just to pry open some of the gaps to make it easier to take some of the parts off, and you'll see what I mean during the process. Other than that, you also will need some sort of bucket or container for draining the fork oil fluid. Then here we come over to the forks themselves. Okay, so here we have the forks. Here is the stock fork tube, and these are all the stock parts that are inside the fork tube. So here you have the top fork cap, this washer plate here, the spacer tube, another washer here, and then you do have your main spring. And then here we have the damping rod, and the damping rod does have a spring on it. And then we do have here the bolt and this little copper washer. You're going to need both these, so make sure you don't lose those. And what we're going to be replacing them with is these YSS parts. And so here we have an adjustable fork cap, so you can adjust the preload tension on your springs. The spacer tube here, which is a lot smaller than the stock one. Another washer ring. The new spring, which is also a little bit smaller than the stock spring, but there is a little bit wider gap on the spring coils. You can see the difference between the stock and the new one. And then right here, this is the emulator. So this is the biggest change that you will be making to the bike and provide the greatest performance increase with the YSS upgrade. Now here's the thing, if you don't drill additional holes in the damping tube, this basically doesn't do anything. This now controls the flow, and it's adjustable, so you can adjust the size of the holes, and this fits right over the end of the damper tube. Now the problem becomes with these tiny little holes, basically this thing is ineffective because this is still controlling the flow of the oil. So what you need to do is take these out and drill in larger holes. So basically this damping tool has holes in it that control the flow of the fork oil and that controls your damping. This is going to replace that. And so you can see it has different holes here. You can adjust it, have better control of the damping with this emulator. And then of course you are also going to need fork oil. Now in the manual, it says you need 430 milliliters of fork oil. This might be slightly different with the YSS suspension upgrade, since we are putting in different parts that are different sizes. So that's what we have that other tool for. So rather than measuring the amount of oil we're putting in, we're going to measure the air gap remaining after we put the oil in. And then finally, you will need a drill to drill holes into the damping tube. Now I do have this drill press. You can use a handheld drill if you want. It doesn't make much of a difference. I just feel a drill press is a little bit safer. You could pick up one of these at Harbor Freight for, I think it was like $89. Okay, so now you should have a better understanding of all the tools you're going to need in all the parts that we have and what parts we're going to be swapping out. So now you should have a better understanding when we go back to the past to do the installation.
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious shit.
Hey, so welcome back from the future. And by now you should have a good idea of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and all the tools needed in order to complete this full installation. So let's get started here. The first thing I'm going to do is just loosen these top caps, not take them off, but just loosen them. And then we'll remove the brake caliper, the speed sensor, and then go ahead with removing the forks. So as I mentioned, I'm not going to remove the caps, but I am just going to loosen them with this 22 millimeter socket. And the reason why we're just loosening them is when we remove the forks, we won't have as much grip or leverage in order to get these off. So it's easier just to loosen them right now. Okay, and so next, let me just straighten this out. What I want to do is remove the brake caliper. So first, using this 5 millimeter Allen, we will remove the speed sensor. And be careful, because you can see we just dropped this little bracket piece that goes in behind the sensor. So make sure you don't lose that. And then next, using a 13 millimeter socket, we can remove the brake caliper. Pry it open and carefully pull out, put out of the way, and then also take off your caliper. And it's recommended use something just to hold the caliper up, so that way it doesn't just flop around. So now I'm just going to use this jack to raise the bike enough just to get the front tire barely off the ground. And I do have a sump guard under the bike, so I'm lifting by the guard and not by the exhaust. And there we go. Okay, so now to remove this front tire, we just have to first loosen this pinch bolt right here. And this is a 6 millimeter Allen. And so we don't need to take it out. Just give it a little loosen. And then using a wrench on this side to hold this in place, and a 24 millimeter on this side, we should then be able to loosen the front tire axle nut. And take that off, and then just knock out this front axle. Now be careful when you take this off, because your speedometer sensor is on there. Removing this, and then on the other side you will have this spacer that goes in your rim there, so make sure you don't lose that. Okay, so now for the rest of these, I don't think I need to go into detail for every single bolt you need to remove. I think it's for the most part, pretty self-explanatory. Whatever's holding the forks on, you need to take off. You'll have to take off the front fender brackets, remove the bolt for the steering stem here, take off your headlight. I do have a different cover on here, but it's the same thing. You'll have to remove your headlight turn signal brackets, and then remove your clip-on handlebars if you have the GT. If you have the Interceptor, well, it's going to be a little bit different. And then you'll have to loosen the nuts for your steering yoke up top. Now, for this, before you let your fork slide out, you should take a measurement here. Now, in the manual, Royal Enfield says you're supposed to measure from the top of the cap down to the yoke right here at this pinch point. And it's supposed to be, they say 10 millimeters. But remember that you're going to be changing the caps. And so the newer caps are going to be a different thickness. So if you're measuring from the top of the cap down, it's going to be different. So rather than from the top of the cap, you might want to measure from below the cap down to your yoke and take that measurement. And then just make sure when you put it back on that both sides measure up to the same exact distance. Okay, so we're down to the last bolt, which is this 6 millimeter Allen pinch bolt right up here on the yoke. So once I loosen this, I should be able to twist the fork and just slide it on out. And I do want to be careful because everything is connected. Your turn signal, your throttle, your brake, clutch, everything like that. And if it's a little tight, you can stick a screwdriver right in that slot to help it slide out. There we go. Okay, so now that we have the fork off, we're going to unscrew the cap, and then you're going to want something that you can drain your oil into. Again, this is the 22 millimeter, and it's already pretty loose since we loosened it before. And here's where we do want to just slowly take it off. There is a spring inside there. There's not much tension on it though, so you're not worried about it shooting off, but you just do want to do it a little bit slowly. There we go. And so we have the fork cap right there. And then we have the fork, the washer plate. And then we'll have the spacer tube with a little bit of oil on it. And then we'll empty the oil. That does look pretty dirty. And then we do have the washer. And then the main spring. And so what we'll do now is we do have to pump this to get the oil out because there's oil all up in the damper rod, the damper tube. So we want to pump it to get as much oil out, and then we'll turn it over and just let it drain for 10 minutes or so, just to make sure we get all the oil out. Okay, now that we have both forks out, I drained this fork here of all the oil, and so the next step is to take out the dampening rod. And that is where you're going to need an 8 millimeter Allen and this special tool to hold the dampening rod in place. Now, this tool, like I mentioned, you're not going to have this tool. So if you're interested, at the end of the video, I'll talk more about this. I'll tell you where you can either buy the tool or how you can make your own, and I'll also provide some exact measurements for this piece in the end if you plan on making your own. So the way it works is you slide this tool into the fork and it holds the dampening rod in place. The problem is on this end with the Allen, there's an Allen bolt right there that screws into the dampening rod. And when you turn it, it turns the dampening rod inside. So you end up just spinning the dampening rod rather than being able to remove the bolt. And that's what you need this tool for, is just to hold that dampening rod in place as you attempt to unscrew it. Now, this is going to be tough to unscrew. I think they put a little bit of Loctite on that bolt. And so a lot of people do recommend using an impact drill. And so I do have this here with a long 8mm Allen on the end and this tool to hold it in place. Whew. Whew. Okay, now I can understand why a lot of people don't do this, because that's pretty tough to remove. Definitely needed to use the impact drill to get it out. It's just in there tight. They must put a lot of Loctite on that. I was worried about stripping it out, so you do have to be careful. Ooh, there it is. Okay, so here is the damping rod. You do have this little spring here. There is also some sort of plastic O-ring there, so you want to be careful of that. And then there is the end of the rod there. So that is what this tool is for, to fit into that and hold it in place while you unscrew. That screws into, and this is the bolt there. And it's actually not a very long bolt, but it is in there tight. You can see a lot of blue thread lock that they use there to hold it in place. And then there is a brass washer that you want to make sure you don't lose. Okay, this was the infamous damping rod that we took out. It was a pain in the ass to take out, so I can see why a lot of people don't do it. But if you look closely, you'll see there are two tiny little holes here. And we're gonna have to drill these 3mm holes and make them 8mm. Then we'll go up a little bit, rotate 90 degrees, and drill in 2 more holes for a total of 4 holes, 8mm each. So this is the point where I'll have future Jerry come in and show you all the tools and show you all the parts, which of course you've already seen, but I haven't seen yet because it hasn't happened for me yet. But while that's happening, I'm gonna go ahead and take apart the other fork, and then I'll be back in just a minute and we can drill the holes and continue with the installation. Okay, so I've got both forks taken apart. I have the damper rods taken out of each, and I put some tape around it just so I can draw a little mark for where I need to drill. If we measure up 12mm, mark a spot, and then I'm going to roll it 90 degrees and just sort of eyeball it right there. Okay, got them both drilled out, filed down, cleaned. Time to put them back in. All right, so to put the damper rods back in, first thing you need to do is, you can hear that. There is a little piece down in the bottom there that didn't come out. So you just got to shake it. Can't really see on camera, but if you look down, you can shake it and you can see if it lines up. So you just got to make sure that it's set into place. And then what we'll do is we take our damper rods, put the spring back on, and drop it right back down into place. And if you look down, you can see straight through, so it should be lined up pretty good. And then we do need to put this bolt back in and make sure you have the little copper washer on it. And I am also going to put a little bit of thread lock on there, since that's something that they had as well. And I am going to use my holder tool, slide it down inside just to hold it in place. And there we go. You can feel it tightening. And just to make sure it is nice and tight, I am going to and there we go. Okay, so we have the damper tube back in. So next step is to add the fork oil. My understanding and the way it works is you're supposed to add the emulator and then add the oil and measure the oil at that point, and then afterwards put in the other parts, the spring, the washer, and obviously the cap. Now, in the Royal Enfield manual, you're supposed to have 430 milliliters of oil, but that's with the stock parts. With these different parts that are different sizes, I'm not sure exactly how much oil you're supposed to have in there. So the recommended thing to do is, rather than measuring the oil, measure the air gap. And my understanding is that once you put the oil in and you have the fork completely compressed, that the air gap at the top should be 150 millimeters. And so I do have this tool here, and I already have it set to 150 millimeters, so we can set it in the top and then suck out any oil that goes over that limit. And I'm under the airplane flight path again. Each of these bottles that they give you is 250 milliliters. I am going to put in the 430 because I'm just curious to see if the 430 will be right on target even with these different parts. Now the first step is to add the emulator. Now these things come from YSS preset, and so I am going to put them in with whatever standard settings they suggest you start with. And if I feel in the future I need to make adjustments, make those adjustments at a later date. So I am going to drop in the emulator. There we go. You might have to, if you look down, you can see it pretty clearly inside, and you can see if it's in the correct position. And so now I'm going to measure out the oil. So I want to put it in exactly 430 just to see where that comes up to. It is 425, 430. All right. All right. So if I press that all the way down, and take this tool here, set at 150 millimeters for the air gap, and then see if we get anything. We are getting a little bit sucked out. Not much. 2 milliliters. So it was within 2 milliliters, which some of that can even be attributed to just anything that's left inside. Even though I drained it, cleaned it, you always get a little bit just left inside that you just couldn't get. Okay, so next we're going to add the spring. From what I've seen, on one side is some writing, and you put the writing side up. From what I've heard, though, it doesn't really matter as long as you do both sides the same direction. Drop the spring in there, and then we do have the washer next. The spacer tube. So there we go. So if we bring this up now, it leaves just enough of a gap. And we're going to put the cap on and just hand tighten it for now. One down, one to go. All right, so I got both forks finished, and I'm just going to reinstall them now. And I don't think I need to show you step by step the process of reinstalling. It's basically the reverse of taking them off, and most of it's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll just highlight a few of the measurements and torque specs that you may need. And then once I'm done with the installation, we'll adjust the preloaders and then take this baby out for a test ride. All right, got it all put back together, no problem. The last step is just to adjust the preload. And from my understanding, when these things come, they're already to the softest position. When you put them in, they're lifted all the way up. So counterclockwise is softer, clockwise is harder. And the consensus seems to be for a starting position is about 1.5 to 2 rotations. So I'm going to start off with 1, 2. 1, 2. And I think that should be good enough to take it out for a test ride just to see how it feels. I also did order the YSS rear shocks, the black edition. They still haven't been delivered yet, so hopefully within the next few days. Cut. Okay, so it's been about a week and a half since I did the front fork upgrade, and within that time it's taken me to edit this video. My YSS rear shocks did come in, so I was able to install those on the bike, and it's very easy install, so I don't need to show you how to do that. It's basically just 2 bolts. And so I have both the front and the rear done. And I'm not going to do a review on it in this video, but I do have to say in the few rides that I've gone on this week, it has made a huge difference into how the bike feels. It feels like a completely different bike. There are bumpy roads that normally when I would ride on, I would always stand up at my pegs to take my weight off the suspension. I don't have to do that now. It just rides smooth over it. Not only smooth, but the tires are staying in contact with the ground. So I'm not going to do a review yet. I do have to put a few hundred more miles on the bike, break in the springs, and then do some sag adjustments to get it dialed in. But I just have to say, so far, I highly recommend, just on my limited experience. Now, I also did mention a few times in the video about this tool and what you can do if you don't have this tool. So what I did is I've gone ahead and made a complete separate video. So go ahead, click on this video, watch this video, and I give you the measurements needed to make your own tool. And I also reference a few other YouTubers out there that have videos showing you how to make your own tool. So watch this video, check those out.